I discovered later on, from looking at her Bible after she passed, I discovered that she had tried to abort me.
Welcome to the Blind Mom Life Podcast. I'm your host, Chelsey Painter Davis, blind wife, mother, and pro-life Christian speaker. I want to invite you to dive deep with my special guests and I as we talk conquering disabilities, cherishing motherhood, and choosing life. Are you ready? Action. I love A Series of Unfortunate Events. It is such a quirky, curious little story. I still remember when my uncle bought these books for my siblings and I when we were just kids. And then later, when the film came out, took us to the theaters to see it. Oh my goodness, how fun watching Violet, Klaus, and Sunny on their wacky adventures as they try to escape the evil clutches of Count Olaf. And oh my goodness, did my uncle look exactly like Jim Carrey in this film. The resemblance was uncanny. And granted, my uncle would have never parked us in front of an oncoming train or trapped us in a birdcage, but he totally would have threatened to do it. He was such a goofball, and you could never tell if he was being serious or not. Oh my goodness, what great memories does this film have for me? For those of you who have never had the privilege of watching the movie or checking out the TV series, it follows the story of the Baudelaire orphans on their journey to find a proper guardian after the untimely death of their parents. Not only are they constantly on the run from the evil Count Olaf as he tries to usurp their inheritance, but they're also on a mission of discovery as they find breadcrumbs of secrets about their parents' lives before they were born. So many of us have loved ones that have hurt us in the past or have done things we didn't expect, but we still have memories of them being good. It's so hard to sort this out. So I'm so excited to introduce you to my new friend Lisa, who's had to live this out in her own life. Not in a fantasy, but in the real world. And I'm so excited for her to share her story. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming and sharing with us today. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I grew up as an Army brat, so I moved around quite a bit. My father was Special Forces, jump master, airborne on the way, just hardcore. He was Marine before he was in the Army. He was in Vietnam twice, and I was young enough to remember those experiences. My mother was an Army wife, so she just basically moved around, and we'll be talking about her later. Myself, I just retired as a school teacher because of disability issues. Back issues, basically. And before that, I was a journalist for 20 years, reporter, editor, photographer, you name it, wow. I did it. And before that, I, just, like I said, was an Army brat, moved around a lot. Now, I have two daughters, and they are both grown, as we say in the South. And one of them has my first grandchild, which I love immensely, enjoying that experience so much. And my other daughter doesn't have any children now, but we will pray that will be soon.
Oh my goodness. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about your childhood?
The childhood, it was a little unusual. My parents were, as I said, my father had been a Marine for 4 years, and then he left the Marine Corps and was going to stay out of it. That was all before Vietnam. However, my mother became pregnant with me, and at the time they were not married, and he wanted to be able to pay for her hospital bills, and the military covers that, so that when she had the baby, me, that would be covered. So he went back in the military and joined the Army Airborne, which he'd always wanted to do. And very successful in there, and he was sent to Vietnam twice. Once when I was 4 or 5 in '65, and then once when I was older in '70 to '71. Um,
What was
he,
that like for you having your Vietnam twice sounds crazy.
it was crazy. The second time, my mother was pregnant with her fourth child, and they had just found out,
Oh,
my
wow.
sister. And the first time, my mother was pregnant with my younger brother.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of would step up, and especially when I got older, around 10, step up and help out my mother while my father was away. And we would move back to off the bases to home,
Mm-hmm.
places where she was from or whatever. And I had a lot of aunts, uncles, cousins who live in Bartow. So when I was 10, we moved to Bartow and lived there for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And while my father was in Vietnam, Vietnam changed him. And as many veterans experience PTSD, he did as well.
Wow.
And especially that first time, it was horrible. I remember just being a young child, and his unit, he was with the Special Forces, and then he was with the 173rd, and both of those units saw a lot of action. And so when he came home, his drinking had gotten out of hand. And I remember one night, I was probably about 4 or so, that I was actually pleading. My mother called me out of my bedroom and told me, "Tell your father you love him. He needs to hear that right now." We were basically pleading for our lives at that point.
Oh,
And
wow. What do you
yeah,
mean by that?
he did not have a gun. However, he knew how to kill people with his bare hands. So my mother knew that. And so she just thought that would be a good strategy, maybe to stop him. And it did. He had threatened, her life.
Was that normal for him to be abusive and
No,
threatening?
I mean, he went through a period uh, in his younger days. He had a horrible, horrible childhood, just one that I won't even go into. It's unimaginable. And he became rehabilitated in his teenage years. But then when he went to Vietnam, it really, turned things around. And so he joined AA after that, and he did very well. And he was an AA leader, and this was in North Carolina. And then we moved to Georgia, and got away from that AA group. And as far as I remember, that's when he went back to drinking. And then when he came, we moved to South Carolina after that. And he got back in an AA group. We were very involved as a family. Bingo, we did everything. It was we just loved it. And he did well then until something happened. I think that's when he got his orders again for Vietnam the second time. And that just turned things around again. And then by the time I was in high school, middle school, going into high school, he was very abusive, and especially towards my mother. And
What kind of
so,
abuse
just
did you see?
uh, you know, at first they tried to. He would hide it. I could hear it. I could hear it. But later on, it was, punching her, hitting
Wow.
her. I tried to help her. He would punch me. Not really that. He kind of took it easy on me, I guess, because I was his daughter. But he really didn't involve us as much, the children. It was mainly
It's
my
mostly
mother.
focused on your mother.
On my mother, yeah. And eventually it got to the point after I left for college that he actually had access to a gun because he retired and became a security guard and did some other things out of school. And then at that point, he had threatened them with the gun and shot, and he was drunk and he missed, thank goodness. And so she left. That's when my mother left after, I believe it was 25 years of marriage.
Wow, that is so scary.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? Did you feel pressure to try to keep things calm in the
Yes.
household?
Yeah, I was the oldest, so that was my job. I felt like, if he was upset because the house wasn't as clean as it should be. There was always some sort of silly excuse, for what he
Right.
did. I would promise to clean the house, make sure it was taken care of, just kind of pacify him,
Mm-hmm.
as much as possible. And, but, uh, unfortunately, it's a common thing in military families. And they don't talk about it, but you live so close together in what they call quarters that you can hear it next door.
Wow. I never thought about that before, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so my mother, basically, she had all four of us, and I was the first who was, as I said, they weren't married at the time. She had met him through his sister, who she worked with, and they kind of came from different sides of town, so to speak, up in West Virginia. She had her father was a businessman, and she had just this normal, typical childhood for the most part, whereas my father's...
Like a happy childhood?
Yes, happy childhood.
Gotcha.
Yeah, whereas my father's was not so happy. Anyway, they got together somehow, and she found out she was pregnant. I knew that she finally told me that when I was in high school, because my father had a daughter from a first marriage who was going to come visit us. So she felt like she needed to tell me. And that was devastating as a high school girl hearing that, because my mother had always kind of made out that they were married for a year before they had me and things like that.
What was devastating about that for you? Was it that your mom lied, or was it that it bothered you that they weren't?
It bothered me because by that point, that's a good question. By that point, she had become a Christian. We were all in the church. And I was at that age, where I knew what that involved. And, I didn't want that to happen. We were taught that that was wrong. And of course, this was back in the 70s. Things were a little different back then.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so imagine for my mother in the 60s, when she was pregnant with me without being married, how difficult that was for her. And so...
was your father's previous marriage, was that over at that point when he was with your mother?
They were separated, and he was living back with his mother. However, back then, you had to be separated for a year before the judge would grant you a divorce.
Okay.
And so in my mother's mind, because she was with my father during that time, she considered herself as having an affair.
Right.
Although nowadays that would not be, maybe quite the same.
It wouldn't have the same stigma
exactly
to it as it did,
because they were already separated. So in her mind, in the time, she felt guilty about that, and then she also felt guilty about having or being pregnant with me.
Right.
In a small town where everybody knew her family, and she had several sisters. So
how old was she at the time that
she was? Well, that's a good question too. You're just so she was about 23, 22. She was in her second year of college.
Okay.
And so she had, what we'd say at that time, kind of lived her life, and that was 57, I believe. So back then women were usually married at that point, but she had went on to college.
My grandmother, I think, got married at 17 and had my father. So yeah, you're right. They were married a lot sooner back then.
Yeah. So, but she was not. And so she really did feel, I'm sure in the small town, being pregnant without being married, she felt
it's very
felt
scary.
Pretty low, very. And so that's the point where I discovered later on, from looking at her Bible after she passed, I discovered that she had tried to abort me. Back then.
How did you discover that in her Bible? What did you find?
Well, after she passed, she had a Bible that she left, and I just kind of would read through it. It was a study type Bible, and it had some pretty intimate questions, just for the person to ask themselves as they were reading. Well, my mother, being the good student that she was, she of course answered every question and wrote out the answers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so this is the Bible I had after her death. And sometimes just for comfort, I would, kind of look through it and read the scriptures from
Yeah,
that
of course.
Bible. And my daughter told me, she said, Mom, she said, you might want to be careful with that Bible. Because apparently we had it at my mother's funeral service and it was open to the 23rd Psalm. And in there she revealed something about my sister that
oh my goodness,
was very intimate.
The Bible's filled with secrets.
Yes. So I said, oh, okay, I will be very careful with that Bible. I won't leave it out for, public consumption anymore. And so I just happened to be reading it one night, and I saw where she said, I feel like, God saved me. I had horrible things in my past. I had lived a wild life. I had an affair with Doug, who was my father. And she said, and then I became pregnant and I tried to abort the pregnancy.
Whoa.
And I just found that out a couple of years ago after she died. I never knew that she had tried that. And I'm not sure how or why. I didn't want to ask her sisters, or bring that up. They're in their 90s
and
now.
They might not even know.
Yeah. I feel like they, well, yeah, you're right. You never know. They might not.
Do you think, were they very close together?
Yes.
That they probably were.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah, but you never know. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
So
what was that? That's a crazy thing to find in someone's Bible.
Yes.
What was that like for you?
What
kind of emotional reaction is that?
I think to this day I'm still processing it, because my mother, to know her in her later life, was just such a strong Christian, amazing, sweet, wonderful person. But she did, thank goodness, Mom, for that she did clarify that she tried to abort me, but it was unsuccessful. And then she said she was so happy that it was not successful because she was blessed with, 4 wonderful children.
Wow.
So that helped me, process that.
Do you think that she knew you would find that, and that's why she wrote it?
I think that sometimes. I really do. I think she
just wanted you to know.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Where's your heart at with that? Like, maybe you should tell us a little bit more about your mom and what it was like in the life that you guys shared together before she passed away, so we can process that with you, this big surprise at the end of everything.
Yeah, she was wonderful. She endured those years of abuse. She was strong. She was sweet. She, like I said, eventually divorced my father. And then she came to live with us for a while. And then she would live with friends, and help them with their ministries and different things like that. And then come back to us. And she would work. She did a lot of work in the church. She became a missionary. And she was a missionary to Israel for 12 years total, mm-hmm. after she turned 62.
After she turned 62?
Yes. And so
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So she's my inspiration now, because I'm 62. So
that's awesome. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And she worked with this school over there, the Jerusalem schools, in a Palestinian, what they call refugee camp. And then she went back. She went back a couple times, but for a total of 12 years, she went back and worked with the hospital in a ministry called Shadet Akim, where the Jewish doctors would bring Iranian children with heart issues over to their hospital and do the operations so that they could get the care they needed. Mm-hmm. And she would work with the families. She would stay there with the children at night, with the families at night. If they were at the hospital, they had a house where hospitality kind of house. She worked there. Mm-hmm. And so she did that for 12 years. And then she also, in between times, she worked with a ministry in Bartow called the Women's Care Center, which is a ministry for women, single women most of the time, or women who are trying to get out of domestic violence situations and their children. And they let them live in the house and, give them financial help, give them classes to manage their money, place to live, food to eat. They have, everything they need,
Somewhere
clothing,
they can
food.
feel safe.
Yes, and help them get back on their feet. And they do a great ministry. And she worked with that for years after she got back from Israel, as long as she could. And then she had a stroke, a stroke on the brain stem. But she, once again, she's my inspiration. She rehabilitated from that, and she was like the top physical therapy patient.
That's awesome.
And then she'd have another stroke, and she'd come back, and finally, we had to put her in a nursing home. But as long as she had strength, she would go to that women's care center whenever she could to help out. So just a compassionate, sweet, loving person.
How do you balance those? This almost sounds like two different people in your life that you're reading about this woman in the Bible, because you said she didn't become a Christian until a little later.
37.
37.
Mm-hmm.
So she's got this big chunk of her life where, like, in her own words, she was living wild.
Yeah.
But then she has this big missionary's heart and this care for these other women. Does that help you process what she wrote in her Bible about you, or does that make it harder?
Yeah, it helps me understand. I'm being a Christian myself and seeing her as an example. I only saw the compassionate, sweet side for the most part. We all have our faults. So, it helps me. She's always raised us to accept people, as they are. And I feel like that helps me in my church. Now I work with the online ministry because I'm basically disabled because of my back and I can't go to church. So I still wanted to find a way to serve. And that's what I've been doing. And there are a lot of people who come through that ministry on both sides of it. Mm-hmm. Some who are actually online counselors like I am, and then some who are just people who just logged on to a church for the first time. And they need that support. Women, I've been able to give them resources and help them, women in my mother's situation, single parents, I have a lot of friends out there from my two careers. So I have a lot of resources, a lot of people who work with United Way and things like that are available. I was a journalist, so I researched things to death. And then I can send those resources their way and help them. And I worked with the Guardian Ad Litem program for a while, which is a wonderful program that helps children and through the court system helps children who are from abusive families or have experienced abuse. The Guardian Ad Litem you're sort of like their representative to help the family where they're at now and help the child as well get the benefits they need. And my mom always told me that was the one thing that she always said. She always said, "I am so proud of you for doing that, Lisa." And she really hadn't told me that she was proud of me in my other careers, but she did love that I worked with the Guardian Ad Litem for a while.
Do you think that she's the place that you got that passion for children and families?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what do you think, what advice do you have for like other moms or other, I guess, children who find themselves trying to balance out their parents? Like, there were these bad things that happened. There was these good things that happened. How can you hold both things in your hand and still be inspired and have love for your mother?
That's such a good question. Such a good question. I learned that in the end, I think most people as parents are doing the best they can with what they have. Mm-hmm. For instance, my father, his background was just horrible. The more as I grew up, the more I found out. They might not tell you as a child, because they figure you're too young to handle things. But he did better than the people, who his stepfather who raised him. And we were never sexually abused like many people have to deal with that. That never even came into play with my father because he had seen that in his own household. My mother was not a Christian for 37 years, so how could I hold her, accountable to standard when, that was, and basically I think it's just looking back and saying, now that I see it, they did the best they could in my case. Mm-hmm. Now I know that's not always the case for, other children, and then I would just advise them to, if you haven't come to know the Lord yet, you would learn that he would give you compassion and understanding sometimes of maybe why people do the things they do. They need him as well as, my father needed God is what he needed. So I would advise them just to understand, if they are Christians that and their parents aren't, that they really don't have that foundation to be compassionate.
Right. So a lot of the beginning of your mom's story was finding herself pregnant in a situation she didn't really want to be in. And then she uses that experience of the abusive household and that being pregnant and in crisis to really motivate her passion in other places. What kind of advice or hope can you offer to other women who might find themselves in a similar situation that they can turn it around just like your mom did?
Well, I think once again, you kind of said it for me because you're just so good with these questions.
Oh, sorry.
Your insight. No, you did. You really made me think. And my advice would be, sorry, I'm having one of those senior moments here.
You're fine,
quick.
Lisa.
My advice would be that they just, once again, focus on that same compassion that Jesus has for each of us in our sinful state. None of us are perfect, and to use their experiences, these bad experiences that you might go through, that in the end that God can and will use them. I have seen it, and I've seen many others say that there are famous ministers, Joyce Myers, who went through horrible abuse, growing up, and now she's helping so many women and men with her experience. God will turn that around and put you in a position where someday that those horrible experiences can be used for good. Not that he initiated them, so to speak, but there are people going through the same things that you might be going through now, that someday perhaps you'll be able to help them because of your experience.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you get to be that good thing that came out of your mom's scary situation. And I'm so glad that, just like she said in your Bible, I'm so glad that we have you with us now.
Forgiveness is hard. It is so tempting to look at other people's sin and hold it in a different category than our own. To look at them and say, no, you're so much worse than me. I never would have made your mistake. I never would have even been close to anything that you've done. You're so beneath me. And hold ourselves up in this phony place of righteousness and say, I'm better because I'm not like you. But that's not what God says about sin. That's not what God says about us. He decides who shall be forgiven. He decides that Jesus' blood covers all sin. And who are we to refuse to celebrate the forgiveness of others, even if their crimes were against us, even if they meant to hurt us, even if we will always feel that pain? Who are we to not declare the goodness of Jesus' sacrifice that covers all sin and forgives all who ask? Time for Ask Me Anything. So the first question I have for you today is, what is the most embarrassing thing you have ever done as a blind mother? Well, Right now, that's a toss-up between accidentally picking up my newborn daughter upside down when she was swaddled in a blanket and accidentally microwaving Raid. Yeah. So I feel like the picking up my daughter upside down thing is kind of self-explanatory. I just felt a bundle of blankets and I went for it. Yeah, learn my lesson quick. Always locate the head before you lift the baby. Now the Raid. That's still a curious one for me. The best explanation I can come up with for why I pulled a plate of hot dogs out of the microwave that had a Raid wall plug-in diffuser on the top of it, burning and chemical smelling and sticky, was that maybe when I took the wall plug-in out of the wall and sat it on the counter, I didn't actually set it on the counter. I think what I must have done is I sat it in the microwave cover plate that was sitting upside down on the counter next to the wall plug-in. And then when I got out the plate of hot dogs and took the microwave cover plate and quickly flipped it onto the glass plate, the wall plug-in must have hit the hot dogs instead of the hard plate. So there was no metal clanking sound from the prongs that go in the wall. And then popped it quick in the microwave without noticing until after 60 seconds, there was a burning and chemical smell that was quite pungent. I had to open the front door. I had to open the balcony. I had to open the windows, try to air out the house. I don't know what it's done to my health that I've basically breathed in hot, sticky, melty, gaseous Raid. Hopefully nothing, but who really knows? And just for the record, I did not eat those hot dogs. They went straight in the trash, and so did that Raid wall plug-in. So the next question I have for you today is, how do you do dishes if you're blind? Well, believe it or not, it is not that difficult to do dishes when you're blind. When you grab a dish, you put the soap on it, you scrub it. When you think that you're probably done, you just run your hand over the dish. You just feel for any gunk, stuck on crusties, super slick, greasy spots, and you will find them if you have a regular, just normal sensitivity in your hands. It doesn't take that much skill to figure out that the dish is dirty. I think blind people actually have an advantage on sighted people in this way, because I think the way that most people wash dishes is they say just scrub, 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 and glance, and they're like, okay, that's fine. But what you guys are missing is when the dirt is kind of clear, or it's just like a greasy film, and that's really difficult to see. So because you guys aren't typically running your hands over the surface of the plate feeling for any dirt, you just assume there isn't any. And I'm not gonna lie, of course there's times where I pull out a plate and I'm like, oh, this is kind of dirty, I missed this spot. But is that because I don't have the skill to clean the dishes? No, it's because I got lazy and I thought if I just threw them in the dishwasher, it would handle it. And my dishwasher did not handle it. It is not the best at catching dirt, this dishwasher I have currently. So I do have to go back, do a little extra work, make sure I'm checking my dishes, and sometimes I have to hand wash things. But you know what? Washing dishes is one of the chores in the house that I feel like I'm the best at, and I feel fully confident as a blind person to get them done. If you want to see more content from me, you can follow me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, X, or you can check out my website, chelseapainterdavis.com. That is a great place to sign up for my newsletter or recommend a friend for the podcast. Do you know someone with an inspiring story? I would love to hear about it. Also, if you like what I do and you want to see me at one of your events, you can click on the Book Now tab of the website and submit a speaking request. I would love to connect with you. Thank you so much for hanging around through the end of the episode. I hope we have shown you today that all life is worth living. Just like in the book of Esther, where God paints a beautiful portrait from the background, God is painting a beautiful portrait with your life, and we can learn so much from each other if we share our stories. Whenever it feels like the darkness is pressing in, just remember the words of Jesus Christ in John chapter 9. As long as I am in the world, I am the light. That sentence did not make sense.